Picture a clay prism buried beneath an ancient temple in southern Iraq, 1922. British archaeologist Stephen Langdon brushes away 4,000 years of dust to reveal 383 lines of cuneiform text that would revolutionize our understanding of human civilization. The Weld Blundell Prism, 20 centimeters tall, reddish-brown clay fired to ceramic hardness, contains something extraordinary. A complete chronicle of kingship from the moment it descended from heaven until the collapse of Mesopotamia's greatest empires. But here's where it gets weird. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, 36,000 years. Before the Great Flood swept over, 8 kings governed for a combined 240 to 200 years. These aren't typos or translation errors. They're deliberate, mathematically precise numbers that reveal sophisticated theological concepts about the origins of civilization. Why would ancient scribes record such impossible figures? What were they really trying to tell us? And how does this mysterious document bridge the gap between mythology and history, between gods and mortal rulers, between cosmic time and human chronology? The Sumerian King List emerged from one of history's most remarkable scribal traditions. Mesopotamian scholars who spent centuries copying, preserving, adapting this text to serve their political and religious needs. Every version shows subtle variations, revealing how different city-states manipulated the past to legitimize present power. The Weld Blundell Prism represents the culmination of this tradition. Four-sided, perfectly preserved, meticulously organized. The scribe who created it around 2000 BC had access to multiple source texts, carefully comparing versions, reconciling discrepancies, making editorial decisions that would influence how humanity understood its own history for millennia. But before we can understand the document's historical impact, we must grasp its most extraordinary claim, that kingship itself was a divine gift, lowered from heaven to Eridu when the world was young, when the boundary between gods and humans remained permeable, when rulers lived for tens of thousands of years. Eridu, the most sacred city in Sumerian cosmology, home of Enki, god of wisdom and fresh water, the place where civilization began. According to the King List, this is where Alulim became the first king when kingship descended from heaven, a phrase that transforms political authority into cosmic drama. 28,800 years. Try to comprehend that number. Alulim ruled longer than all recorded human history combined. This wasn't ignorance or exaggeration. It was sophisticated theology. The Sumerians understood that primordial time operated differently than human time, that the earliest kings existed in a realm where divine and mortal boundaries blurred. The second king, Alalgar, also ruled from Eridu for 36,000 years. Notice the mathematical precision, 28,800, 36,000. These aren't random. They're multiples of 3,600. The SAR in Mesopotamian mathematics, representing a complete cosmic cycle. Ancient astronomers had identified celestial patterns, planetary conjunctions, precessional movements. They embedded these cosmic rhythms into their history. Enmenluana of Bad Tabira came next, ruling 43,200 years. The city name translates as Wall of the Metalworkers. Civilization was advancing. Bronze technology, the revolutionary innovation that separated Neolithic villages from Bronze Age empires. The King List acknowledged technological progress even in mythological time, and Mengalana continued the Bad Tabira dynasty for another 28,800 years, returning to Alulim's number. This repetition wasn't coincidence. The composers worked within established frameworks of sacred mathematics, creating patterns that connected earthly kingship to cosmic order. Then comes Dumuzid, 36,000 years at Bad Tabira. But this name should make you stop. Dumuzid, later known as Tammuz, was one of Mesopotamia's most important deities. The dying and rising god, agricultural cycles personified. His inclusion among primordial kings reveals something profound. In antediluvian time, the boundary between gods and kings remained deliberately fluid. Was Dumuzid god or king? The answer is yes. Both. Neither. The categories hadn't separated yet. This theological sophistication, maintaining paradox rather than resolving it, demonstrates the intellectual depth of Sumerian thought. Ensipadsidana of Larak ruled 28,800 years. Larak's inclusion establishes geographical diversity in cosmic kingship. The divine plan involved multiple cities, not just one sacred center. This would become crucial for later political claims. Every major city could point to the king list and say, "See, even in primordial times, kingship moved between different centers. Our turn to rule is part of divine pattern." And Mendarana of Sippar governed 21,000 years from the city sacred to Shamash, the sun god. Solar worship added another cosmic layer. The sun represented divine justice, the ordered progression of time. His slightly reduced reign, 21,000 versus 28,800, signaled the approaching end of the antediluvian age. Ubartutu of Shuruppak concluded the primordial sequence with 18,600 years, the shortest antediluvian reign. His city holds special significance. Shuruppak was home to Utnapishtim, the flood hero from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Some versions explicitly identify Ubartutu as Utnapishtim's father, creating direct genealogical connection between the King List and Mesopotamia's most famous literary work. This interconnection demonstrates something crucial. Ancient texts weren't isolated documents. They formed networks of meaning, each reference strengthening others, creating cultural knowledge so deeply embedded that even contradictions reinforced rather than undermined the system. The astronomical basis of these reign lengths reveals mathematical thinking that connected earthly kingship to celestial phenomena. Every number, 28,800, 36,000, 43,200, 21,000, relates to multiples of 3,600. The SAR, the complete cycle. By structuring antediluvian reigns around this cosmic number, composers created frameworks linking primordial kingship to universal rhythms. But why these impossibly long reigns? In Mesopotamian thought, the antediluvian period represented a time when divine proximity remained immediate, when communication between heaven and earth flowed freely. Extraordinary longevity reflected closeness to divine power, roles as intermediaries between immortal and mortal realms. As humanity moved further from divine origins, the King List suggests, lifespans naturally decreased. This wasn't punishment, it was inevitable consequence of separation. Cosmic distance from the moment of creation. Then everything changed. The flood swept over. 4 simple words in Sumerian. Amaru Ba'ur, deceptively brief, profoundly devastating. This wasn't merely natural disaster. It was cosmic reset, divine judgment that fundamentally altered relationships between gods and humanity, between rulers and subjects, between mythological past and emerging historical present. The flood represents the single most important boundary marker in all Mesopotamian historical consciousness. Everything divides into before the flood and after the flood. Time itself transformed. The impossible longevity of primordial kings gave way to merely exceptional lifespans of early historical rulers. Archaeological evidence from across Mesopotamia reveals extensive flooding throughout the region's history. Leonard Woolley's 1920s excavations at uncovered a thick layer of clean clay, 2.5 meters deep, deposited between earlier and later occupation levels. He initially interpreted this as evidence for the biblical flood, but subsequent analysis revealed complexity. Similar flood deposits at different sites dated to different periods, the most significant around 2900 BC. Shuruppak, the last antediluvian king's city, shows particularly intriguing evidence. Major flooding around 2900 BC, distinct break in archaeological sequence, thick deposits of alluvial clay, period of abandonment before reoccupation with different pottery styles and architectural techniques. The correlation between Shurupak's archaeological evidence and its role in flood mythology has attracted enormous scholarly attention. But here's what's fascinating. The literary tradition likely drew upon multiple flood experiences rather than preserving memory of a single catastrophic event. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers sustained Mesopotamian civilization, but posed constant threats through unpredictable flooding cycles. Ancient texts frequently reference flood control as primary royal responsibility, successful flood management serving as key marker of divine approval and effective kingship. Climate data from ice cores, tree rings, paleo-environmental sources indicate several periods of exceptional precipitation in the Near East during the 4th and 3rd millennia BC. These wet periods, alternating with extended droughts, created conditions conducive to both severe flooding and subsequent population movements. The social disruption caused by such environmental extremes contributed to flood narratives that interpreted natural disasters as divine interventions requiring fundamental changes in human behavior. After the flood had swept over, when kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was in Kish. Geographical shift, theological statement, political claim. The post-flood world operated differently. Where antediluvian kings had ruled from Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak, the first post-diluvian dynasty established itself at Kish in northern Babylonia. This wasn't random. Kish occupied strategic position and possessed strong religious credentials through association with Enlil, the god who had decreed the flood. Gar, first post-diluvian king, ruled Kish for 100 years. Notice the dramatic reduction from antediluvian norms. Still extraordinary by modern standards, but representing fundamental shift. This reign length established new baseline. Divine favor still extended royal lives far beyond normal human limits, but within more comprehensible parameters. The reduction reflected theological concepts about humanity's increased distance from divine power following the flood's purification. The cosmic reset had fundamentally altered the rules. Subsequent rulers show continued decline. Gula Nidaba Anu for 960 years, Palakinatim for 900, Nangish Lishma for 670. This gradual decrease creates narrative arc connecting immediate post-flood period, when divine influence remains strong, to increasingly human-scale governance. The mathematical precision of these decreasing numbers suggests deliberate compositional choices rather than preservation of actual historical memory. The compilers were creating frameworks, not recording facts. But these frameworks served crucial purposes, explaining political change, legitimizing contemporary authority, maintaining cultural continuity despite transformation. The nature of royal authority itself underwent fundamental transformation in the post-diluvian period. Antediluvian kings had ruled as direct representatives of divine will, their extraordinary longevity reflecting their intermediary roles. Post-diluvian rulers, while still claiming divine sanction, governed through more conventional means: military power, administrative systems, diplomatic relationships with other city-states. Archaeological evidence from early dynastic sites provides material correlates for these ideological changes. Royal cemetery at burials demonstrate new forms of royal display, emphasizing worldly power and wealth rather than cosmic connection. Elaborate grave goods, golden helmets, jewelry, weapons reflect rulers who validated authority through material splendor and military success rather than divine longevity alone. 23 kings comprised Kish's first dynasty, ruling for a combined 24,510 years, 3 months, and 3.5 days, according to the Weld-Blundell prism. The mathematical precision, down to fractional days, demonstrates evolution toward documentary consciousness. We're moving from cosmic time to chronological time, from theology to history. But the most fascinating figure in this entire dynasty is Etana, the shepherd who ascended to heaven. His reign of 1,560 years represents temporary reversal of the declining trend, reflecting his unique position within Mesopotamian mythology. Etana is the subject of one of the region's most important literary compositions, the Epic of Etana. The story is extraordinary. Etana faced succession crisis. His wife remained childless despite desperate desire for heir. The gods, recognizing the importance of dynastic continuity for maintaining cosmic order, arranged for Etana to rescue an eagle that had betrayed its friendship with a serpent. In gratitude, the eagle agreed to carry Etana to heaven, where he could petition Ishtar directly for the plant of birth. The ascension sequence provides remarkable astronomical detail. Etana's progressive view of Earth shrinking below as he rises through successive heavenly levels demonstrates sophisticated knowledge of celestial geography. The epic composers were clearly familiar with concepts relating terrestrial and cosmic perspectives. Archaeological evidence from Kish provides material correlates for Etana traditions. Cylinder seals depicting a human figure ascending to heaven on an eagle's back. These iconographic traditions, dating to early dynastic period, demonstrate the antiquity and cultural importance of Etana's legendary ascension. The theological implications extend far beyond individual royal achievement. Etana's successful petition to Ishtar for the plant of birth established divine precedent for royal intervention in natural processes, legitimizing subsequent claims by historical rulers to possess supernatural powers over fertility, prosperity, dynastic succession. Etana's role as shepherd reflects important ideological developments. The shepherd metaphor, which became standard terminology for rulers throughout the ancient Near East, emphasized royal responsibility for protecting and nurturing subject populations rather than simply exercising dominance. This ideological shift from cosmic rulership to pastoral care reflects evolution from antediluvian to post-diluvian concepts of royal authority. Then comes Enmebaragesi, and suddenly we're dealing with history, not legend. Unlike his predecessors, whose existence depends entirely on literary tradition, Enmebaragesi is attested by contemporary inscriptions, providing independent verification of his historical reality. A votive inscription discovered at Nippur identifies Enmebaragesi, king of Kish, making him one of the earliest Mesopotamian rulers for whom we possess contemporary documentary evidence. This is the moment when the King List transitions from mythological framework to historical chronicle. We can see it happening in real time. The inscription was carved on limestone, employs formulaic language that would become standard in later Mesopotamian royal inscriptions, includes divine invocations and territorial authority claims. Its archaeological context within the Enlil temple complex at Nippur indicates Enmebaragesi's recognition by the region's most important religious center. According to the King List, Enmebaragesi carried away as spoil the weapons of the land of Elam, indicating successful military campaigns beyond traditional Mesopotamian boundaries. This expansion into Iranian territory represents one of the earliest documented examples of Mesopotamian imperial ambition. The conflict with Elam reflects broader patterns of competition for control over trade routes and natural resources. Elam's mountainous territory provided access to metals, stones, other materials essential for Mesopotamian civilization, but unavailable in the river valley's alluvial deposits. Enmebaragesi's successful campaign established Kish's dominance over these crucial supply networks. Archaeological evidence from Susa and other Elamite sites reveals destruction levels dating to early dynastic III period that may correlate with Enmebaragesi's military activities. These destruction deposits contain Mesopotamian-style artifacts suggesting direct political intervention rather than simple trade relationships. Enmebaragesi's son, Aga, the final ruler of Kish's first dynasty, played crucial role in Mesopotamian literary traditions through his conflicts with Gilgamesh of Uruk. The epic poem Gilgamesh and Aga presents detailed accounts of diplomatic and military competition between these legendary rulers, providing insights into early dynastic political relationships. But Aga's significance extends beyond literature. His conflict with Gilgamesh represents the moment when Kish's hegemonic authority, established by Enmebaragesi, faced serious challenge from resurgent southern powers. The political landscape was shifting. Then Kish was defeated and the kingship was taken to Inanna, Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, the place where Inanna ruled, the settlement whose archaeological remains reveal massive walls extending over 9 kilometers in circumference, one of the most sophisticated fortification projects of the ancient world. The first dynasty of Uruk begins with Meskiagashur, son of Utu, who ruled 324 years before he entered the sea and disappeared. This cryptic description has generated endless scholarly debate. Literal maritime expeditions, symbolic representations of death and divine transformation. The Sumerian phrase Abba Ba'an Kufor literally describes entering water and vanishing, but the specific choice of words implies maritime rather than riverine contexts. Archaeological evidence from Persian Gulf sites reveals extensive Mesopotamian cultural influence during early dynastic period. Characteristic pottery styles, cylinder seals, architectural techniques indicating direct contact rather than indirect trade. Sites along the Arabian coast have yielded Mesopotamian artifacts in contexts suggesting permanent settlement rather than temporary trading posts. Meskiagashur's identification as son of Utu connects him directly to Shamash, the sun god. This divine parentage claim represents significant development in royal ideology, moving beyond general divine favor to specific genealogical connections with particular deities. The sun god association proves particularly appropriate for a ruler whose activities allegedly extended into maritime realms, as Shamash's daily journey across the sky provided natural metaphor for transcending geographical boundaries. Trade networks connecting Mesopotamia with the Indus Valley civilization required sophisticated maritime technologies. Archaeological evidence from Harappan sites reveals Mesopotamian artifacts indicating regular commercial relationships. These material exchanges required coordinated expeditions involving multiple ships and extended voyages demanding royal sponsorship and organization. Enmerkar succeeded Meskiagashur, ruling 420 years and playing central role in Mesopotamian literary traditions through conflicts with Aratta, a distant mountain kingdom. The epic compositions Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta and Enmerkar and Ensukeshdana preserve detailed accounts of these legendary conflicts, revealing sophisticated diplomatic and military strategies. The conflict centered on competition for divine favor and access to precious materials, particularly metals and stones required for temple construction and royal display. Aratta's location in Iranian highlands provided access to resources unavailable in Mesopotamia's alluvial environment. Lugalbanda, 200 years according to the King List, father of Gilgamesh, hero of extraordinary adventures preserved in epic compositions that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of geography far beyond Mesopotamia's boundaries. Lugalbanda in the mountain cave presents remarkable accounts of the hero's survival in hostile mountain environments. Detailed descriptions of mountain landscapes, weather patterns, animal behavior suggest genuine familiarity with highland environments requiring extensive travel and exploration. These geographical details provide important evidence for early dynastic knowledge of regions far beyond traditional Mesopotamian territories. Lugalbanda's encounter with the Anzud bird, massive supernatural creature capable of controlling weather and natural forces, represents one of the most dramatic episodes in Mesopotamian heroic literature. The narrative describes complex negotiations between hero and divine bird, resulting in agreements that provided Lugalbanda with supernatural powers, extraordinary speed, ability to become invisible, capacity to communicate with animals and supernatural beings. Archaeological evidence from highland regions of Iran and Turkey reveals Mesopotamian artifacts during early dynastic periods supporting traditions about rulers conducting expeditions into distant territories. Sites in the Zagros Mountains have yielded Mesopotamian-style cylinder seals and pottery in contexts suggesting direct contact rather than indirect trade. Then comes Gilgamesh, the king who would become immortal not through divine longevity but through epic poetry. The ruler whose adventures would be copied, translated, adapted for 3,000 years. The hero who searched for eternal life and learned that immortality comes through deeds, not years. The King List gives Gilgamesh 126 years, a dramatic reduction from his father's 1,200. We're approaching historical consciousness. Reign lengths entering parameters that ancient audiences might consider exceptional but not impossible. Contemporary evidence confirms Gilgamesh's historical existence. An inscription from Tumal mentions him as builder of Nippur's walls. Archaeological excavations at Uruk reveal massive fortification systems dating to his period. The 9-kilometer wall circuit represents coordinated labor mobilization requiring centralized political authority. But it's the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest written story, that transformed this historical king into eternal legend. The quest for immortality, the friendship with Enkidu, the journey to Utnapishtim, the flood survivor, the plant of rejuvenation lost to a serpent. Lessons about mortality, meaning the limits of human power. Then Uruk was defeated and the kingship was taken to Ur. The first dynasty of Ur. Archaeological evidence for this dynasty is spectacular, literally golden. Leonard Woolley's excavations between 1922 and 1934 uncovered the royal cemetery of Ur, containing burial complexes that demonstrate extraordinary wealth and sophisticated ceremonial practices unlike anything previously documented in Bronze Age Near East. Mesopotamia, founder of Ur's first dynasty, ruled 80 years according to the King List, a dramatic reduction from earlier figures marking definitive transition toward historical chronology. Contemporary inscriptional evidence confirms his existence through a gold bowl discovered in the royal cemetery bearing his name and titles, Mesopotamia, King of Ur. But the real drama lies in what Woolley found, PG 789, the tomb of Queen Puabi. 74 individuals accompanied the queen in death, soldiers positioned near the entrance, musicians grouped around elaborate harps and lyres, court attendants arranged in careful ceremonial order. The evidence suggests ritual suicide or sacrifice on a scale that staggers imagination. The careful arrangement demonstrates sophisticated ceremonial protocols requiring extensive planning. Soldiers wore copper helmets and carried spears. Musicians held instruments decorated with gold and lapis lazuli. Court attendants wore elaborate jewelry and headdresses. All apparently died together, accompanying their queen into the afterlife. Chemical analysis of skeletal remains reveals traces of mercury and toxic substances, suggesting the use of poisons producing relatively peaceful deaths. The absence of trauma marks on most skeletons supports interpretations of voluntary participation rather than violent coercion. But voluntary must be understood within frameworks of religious ideology and social pressure that convinced victims their deaths served cosmic order. The golden helmet attributed to Akalam Dug, possibly Mesanapata's son or rival, exhibits remarkable craftsmanship. Sheet gold hammered over wooden or leather form, decorated with relief patterns mimicking woven textiles. Technical sophistication indicating specialized craftsmen whose skills were supported by royal patronage and access to imported materials. The Standard of Ur, discovered in the cemetery and dating to this period, provides visual documentation of military and ceremonial activities. Two contrasting scenes. Warfare showing organized infantry formations with standardized equipment, and peaceful prosperity showing elaborate banquet scenes with exotic foods demonstrating access to luxury goods from distant regions. But here's where the King List reveals its most sophisticated editorial strategy. multiple dynasties clearly ruled simultaneously. Uruk, Kish, Awan, Hamazi, Adab, all claiming supreme authority during overlapping periods. Archaeological and textual evidence demonstrates this conclusively, yet the king list maintains fiction of sequential kingship. It states that kingship was taken to various cities in chronological succession, even when evidence shows concurrent rule. Why this deliberate distortion? Because Mesopotamian political theology couldn't accommodate multiple centers claiming supreme authority. The concept of kingship established during the antediluvian period, when it descended from heaven, required theoretical framework of undivided sovereignty. Legitimate kingship could reside in only one location at any given time. This editorial approach demonstrates sophisticated understanding of relationships between ideological consistency and historical accuracy. The compilers chose ideological coherence over factual precision because the document's purpose was legitimizing contemporary political authority, not providing objective historical record. The dynasty of Awan, 3 kings ruling 356 years, represents particularly enigmatic entry. Archaeological evidence points to the Susiana Plain in southwestern Iran. The dynasty's inclusion, despite its non-Mesopotamian location, reflects sophisticated concepts about geographical scope of legitimate authority. Hamazi presents even greater interpretive challenges. Single ruler, Hadanish, governing 360 years. Geographical location remains uncertain despite extensive scholarly investigation. Textual references describe it as distant land associated with exotic materials and unusual customs, suggesting location in highland regions beyond direct Mesopotamian control. Then comes the 3rd dynasty of Kish. 7 rulers, 491 years combined. The first ruler, Kubaba, the sole female ruler mentioned in the entire Sumerian King List. 100 years according to standard version. Her unique position has generated extensive scholarly discussion about women's roles in early political organization. Contemporary administrative texts reveal women exercising significant economic and religious authority, suggesting Kubaba's political success built upon established precedents for female leadership in specialized contexts. The name Kubaba incorporates goddess Baba associated with healing and fertility, suggesting religious foundations for political authority that transcended normal gender restrictions on royal succession. Mesopotamian religious traditions included numerous powerful female deities whose worship involved female priestesses exercising significant temporal authority. Everything changed with Sargon of Akkad. Around 2334 BC, this revolutionary figure did something unprecedented. He successfully unified the entire Mesopotamian region under centralized imperial control, extending authority from Persian Gulf to Mediterranean Sea. The King List gives Sargon 56 years, human-scale chronology, no supernatural longevity. This is history, documented through contemporary inscriptions, archaeological evidence, administrative archives. We've definitively crossed from mythological to historical consciousness. The name Sargon itself, Sharu Ken in Akkadian, meaning legitimate king, reveals ideological challenges faced by a usurper seeking to establish dynastic legitimacy. Unlike previous rulers whose authority derived from hereditary succession or divine appointment to traditional thrones, Sargon created legitimacy through military conquest and administrative innovation. Contemporary inscriptions describe Sargon as king of Akkad, who conquered lands from the rising of the sun to the setting of the sun, employing cosmic imagery connecting terrestrial achievements to divine order. This rhetorical strategy adapted traditional Mesopotamian concepts of universal kingship to legitimize unprecedented territorial expansion. The city of Akkad, which Sargon established as his capital, represented radical departure from traditional urban organization through its creation as purpose-built imperial center. Archaeological efforts to locate Akkad have proven unsuccessful despite extensive surveys. but textual evidence suggests innovative urban planning, reflecting imperial administrative requirements. The Akkadian language, Semitic tongue distinct from Sumerian, became medium of imperial administration throughout Sargon's domains. Cuneiform script, originally developed for Sumerian, underwent significant adaptation to accommodate Akkadian's different grammatical structures and phonetic requirements. These linguistic innovations required extensive scribal retraining. Military innovations included development of professional standing armies, replacing traditional city-state militias. Archaeological evidence reveals standardized weapons indicating coordinated production. The composite bow, characteristic of Akkadian military technology, provided tactical advantages through increased range and penetrating power. Sargon's daughter, Enheduanna, served as high priestess of Nana at and composed sophisticated religious poetry, representing some of earliest literature attributed to specific author. Her hymns written in Sumerian despite Akkadian royal background demonstrate cultural synthesis characterizing imperial policy. Rimush succeeded Sargon, ruling 15 years while facing massive rebellions. Contemporary inscriptions describe brutal suppression, thousands of prisoners executed, entire populations deported. The violence required to maintain imperial control over culturally diverse territories was staggering. Manishtusu ruled 15 years, conducting extensive campaigns expanding imperial territory. The Manishtusu obelisk discovered at Susa documents land purchases through compensation rather than confiscation, demonstrating imperial policies designed to minimize resistance. Then came Naram-Sin, beloved of Sin, who ruled 56 years while implementing the most radical innovation in royal ideology ever documented. Unlike predecessors who claimed divine favor, Naram-Sin declared himself an actual god. He adopted the divine determinative in cuneiform writing. He wore the horned crown traditionally reserved for deities. The victory stele of Naram-Sin, discovered at Susa, provides remarkable visual documentation. The stele depicts Naram-Sin wearing horned crown while leading Akkadian forces against lullaby people of Zagros Mountains. The artistic composition places divine king at mountain apex with enemy forces scattered below and celestial symbols overhead, presenting military victory as divine intervention. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive temple construction dedicated to worship of Naram-Sin as living god. This wasn't metaphor. These were actual temples where the king received worship as deity during his lifetime. But hubris brings punishment. The Curse of Agad, literary composition from III period, preserves traditions about Naram-Sin's conflicts with traditional religious authorities. According to the narrative, Naram-Sin's destruction of Enlil's temple at Nippur provoked divine wrath, manifesting through Gutian invasions and eventual Akkadian collapse. Archaeological evidence from Nippur reveals destruction levels dating to late Akkadian period that may correlate with temple destruction described in the curse. The literary tradition, while influenced by later political perspectives, reflects genuine tensions between innovative royal ideology and conservative religious establishments. Shar-Kali-Shari, final effective ruler, governed 25 years while confronting mounting challenges. Gutian raiders, Amorite incursions, rebellions throughout empire strained resources beyond capacity for effective response. The fragmentation during his reign demonstrates practical limitations of imperial systems depending on continuous military success. Then came chaos, complete political breakdown. The King List captures this moment with one of its most haunting phrases. Who was king? Who was not king? Enuma Lugal, Enuma Nu Lugal. This rhetorical question represents far more than literary flourish. It constitutes fundamental acknowledgement that the very concept of legitimate kingship had temporarily dissolved under weight of foreign conquest and political fragmentation. 4 individuals ruled during this anarchic period: Igigi, Nanum, Imi, Ilulu, for a combined total of only 6 years. The brevity suggests either extremely brief reigns or overlapping claims preventing any single ruler from establishing effective control. Contemporary administrative texts become increasingly rare, indicating breakdown of bureaucratic systems. Archaeological surveys across former Akkadian territories reveal widespread urban decline, abandonment of irrigation systems creating agricultural crises forcing populations to relocate. Paleoclimatic data indicates severe drought conditions exacerbating political instability by reducing agricultural productivity. Enter the Gutians, highlanders from Zagros Mountains. The King List identifies 21 Gutian rulers collectively governing 124 years and 40 days. Foreign occupation, cultural crisis, national trauma. But here's what's fascinating. Archaeological evidence reveals Gutian rule involved complex cultural interactions rather than simple barbaric occupation. Material culture shows mixing of highland and lowland traditions. Administrative texts reveal continued use of cuneiform and Akkadian legal formulas. Cultural synthesis, not replacement. The uniformity of 6-year reigns for early Gutian rulers suggests either editorial patterning or genuine institutional constraints. Highland societies often employed rotational leadership, preventing individual rulers from accumulating excessive power, traditions adapted to govern conquered territories. Later Gutian rulers show longer reigns, Yalagab 15 years, Yarlaganda 7 years, Siam 7 years, suggesting increasing stability as highland rulers adapted to Mesopotamian governmental traditions and developed effective strategies for managing conquered populations. But the final Gutian king Tirigan ruled only 40 days before defeat by Utu-Hagal of Uruk. Liberation. Restoration of Mesopotamian independence under native rule. The end of foreign domination. Utu-Hagal's emergence as liberator marked pivotal moment. The King List gives him 7 years, 6 months, 15 days, mathematical precision reflecting evolution toward documentary consciousness. This chronological accuracy demonstrates transformation from mythological framework to historical record-keeping. Contemporary inscriptions provide extraordinary detail about the military campaign terminating Gutian authority. Systematic approach eliminating strongholds throughout northern Mesopotamia. Coordinated attacks preventing enemy consolidation. These operations required logistical capabilities exceeding anything previously documented. But Utu-Hagal's success was brief. Political power shifted to Ur-Nammu, who founded Ur's third dynasty, the last great Sumerian Renaissance. 18 years, according to King List. Historical reality confirmed by extensive contemporary documentation. Ur-Nammu created one of world's earliest law codes. Fragmentary tablets from Nippur preserve legal innovations balancing royal authority with traditional community justice. Marriage contracts, property disputes, commercial regulations, criminal penalties, revealing Mesopotamian society's complexity during political reconstruction. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, rising approximately 30 meters above surrounding plain, required coordinating thousands of workers over extended periods. Sophisticated engineering, bitumen waterproofing, drainage systems, structural reinforcements enabling monument survival for millennia. The scale demonstrated administrative capabilities exceeding previous dynasties while creating physical symbols of imperial power. Shulgi succeeded Ur-Nammu, ruling 48 years while implementing administrative innovations representing culmination of Sumerian political achievement. Contemporary sources reveal extraordinary personal capabilities, literacy in multiple languages, mathematical expertise, athletic prowess, enabling him allegedly to run 200 kilometers between Nippur and Ur in single day. While these claims incorporate legendary elements, they reflect genuine royal emphasis on personal excellence and direct governmental involvement, distinguishing Ur the Third kingship from earlier traditions. The administrative archives from Shulgi's reign, tens of thousands of tablets discovered throughout the empire, provide unprecedented documentation of ancient governmental operations. sophisticated systems managing agricultural production, craft manufacturing, trade relationships, military organization operated according to standardized procedures across vast territories. The Dream Archive documenting livestock center administration contains over 14,000 tablets detailing complex logistics coordinating religious observances across dozens of cities and temples. Amar Sin succeeded Shulgi, ruling 9 years while maintaining administrative systems and territorial extent. Shusin governed 9 years facing mounting external pressures, Amorite populations migrating into Mesopotamian territories in growing numbers creating demographic pressures straining empire's capacity. Archaeological evidence from frontier regions reveals construction of extensive fortification systems, the famous wall built to exclude Amorites, demonstrating recognition of mounting security challenges. Administrative response included increased military recruitment, expanded fortification construction, enhanced coordination between central and provincial authorities. Ibbi Sin emerged as final ruler governing 24 years during escalating crisis, continued Amorite migrations, Elamite military interventions, internal rebellions, economic disruptions caused by climate change and agricultural failures. Archaeological evidence reveals increasing political fragmentation, economic decline, social disruption indicating systemic breakdown. The collapse of Ur-III Empire under Elamite and Amorite pressure represented more than military defeat. Fundamental transformation in Mesopotamian political organization influencing subsequent development for centuries. But here's the crucial point. Through this collapse, the Sumerian King List achieved its most enduring historical significance. It became the template upon which all subsequent Mesopotamian royal chronicles would be constructed. The Assyrian King List, compiled around 1100 BC, directly borrowed sequential presentation format while extending chronological framework to encompass Assyrian traditions. The opening formula, in former times, the ancestors of Shamshi-Adad who lived in tents deliberately echoes antediluvian section by presenting early rulers as emerging from nomadic origins, paralleling primordial emergence of kingship. Assyrian royal inscriptions from Neo-Assyrian period demonstrate sophisticated adaptation of King List ideological frameworks, justifying imperial expansion. Sargon II's inscriptions describing conquest of northern Israel employ terminology and conceptual structures derived directly from King List's presentation of legitimate kingship passing between cities according to divine will. The Babylonian Chronicles series, 750-280 BC, represents most sophisticated development of historical writing techniques pioneered in Sumerian King List. These chronicles employed chronological precision and sequential organization while incorporating contemporary events reflecting increasingly complex political landscape. Berossus, Babylonian priest writing in Greek during Hellenistic period, preserved King List traditions while translating them into frameworks communicating Mesopotamian achievements to Mediterranean audiences. His account of 10 antediluvian kings ruling combined 432,000 years demonstrates both continuity with and adaptation of traditions. The King List's influence extended far beyond Mesopotamian boundaries. Archaeological evidence from across Levant reveals adoption of Mesopotamian royal titulary and ceremonial practices deriving from King List traditions about divine origins and cosmic responsibilities of legitimate rulers. Persian imperial ideology under Achaemenid dynasty incorporated significant elements from Mesopotamian royal traditions, concepts of universal kingship, and divine mandate traceable to King List formulations. The Behistun inscription of Darius Dak employs organizational principles demonstrating familiarity with Mesopotamian historical writing. Biblical historical writing shows clear influence from Mesopotamian chronographic traditions. The presentation of 10 generations from Adam to Noah with extraordinarily long lifespans, gradually decreasing directly parallels King List's antediluvian section while adapting content to serve Israelite theological purposes. Genesis genealogies. Adam lived 930 years, Seth 912 years, Methuselah 969 years. Sound familiar? The pattern matches Mesopotamian traditions about primordial humanity's proximity to divine power and gradual degradation of human capabilities over time. Modern scholarly approaches have evolved dramatically since initial discovery. Early 20th century positivist scholarship attempted extracting factual historical information by separating mythological from historical content. Thorkild Jacobson and Samuel Noah Kramer argued the document preserved genuine historical memories beneath legendary elaborations. The archaeological revolution, extensive excavations at Uruk, Kish, provided frameworks for evaluating historical reliability through material evidence independently dated. Discovery of contemporary inscriptions mentioning Enmebaragesi and Mesanepada demonstrated the King List preserved genuine historical information while also revealing significant discrepancies between chronology and material sequences. Contemporary approaches employ sophisticated methodologies, recognizing complex relationships between textual traditions and material evidence. Piotr Michalowski and Gerald Cooper demonstrated how King List functioned simultaneously as historical record and ideological document, preserving genuine memories while adapting them to serve contemporary political and religious purposes. Literary analysis reveals sophisticated compositional techniques, mathematical patterns underlying reign assignments, geographical distribution of dynastic centers, editorial strategies integrating diverse source materials. All reflect deliberate authorial choices, creating coherent theological and political narratives. These literary dimensions provide crucial insights into Mesopotamian concepts of history, kingship, divine intervention in human affairs, complementing and sometimes contradicting historical information preserved in the document. The impossibly long reigns attributed to antediluvian and early post-diluvian rulers clearly reflect theological rather than historical concerns. But the gradual reduction throughout early dynastic period suggests systematic editorial approaches that may preserve genuine chronological relationships even when specific numerical values remain unreliable. Comparative analysis with other ancient chronographic traditions provides important insights. Similarities between Mesopotamian and biblical genealogies. Parallels with Egyptian king lists and Manetho's chronographic work. Connections with Hittite and other Near Eastern historical texts. All demonstrate shared cultural concepts about relationships between divine authority and political legitimacy. The King List's continuing significance for understanding ancient Mesopotamian civilization extends beyond political chronology, encompassing crucial insights into early state formation, religious ideology, development of historical consciousness in human societies. The document's presentation of kingship as divine institution that descended from heaven and moved between cities according to cosmic will provides fundamental insights into Mesopotamian concepts of political legitimacy and territorial authority. These ideological frameworks influenced governmental structures throughout history while providing models other societies adapted to serve their own needs. The contribution to understanding early state formation lies particularly in documenting transition from city-state to territorial organization, characterizing Mesopotamian political development during 3rd millennium BC. The presentation of dynasties controlling increasingly extensive territories, from single cities to regional hegemonies to imperial systems, provides crucial evidence for processes through which complex political organizations emerged from simpler structures. Religious ideology preserved in King List offers essential insights into Mesopotamian concepts of divine kingship and relationships between earthly authority and cosmic order. The development of historical consciousness documented in King List represents one of humanity's earliest systematic attempts to understand relationships between past and present through organized chronological frameworks. The evolution from mythological narrative to increasingly historical record-keeping demonstrates how ancient societies developed intellectual tools for comprehending temporal change across extended periods. This historical consciousness enabled Mesopotamian civilization to maintain cultural continuity despite repeated political transformations while providing conceptual frameworks influencing historical thinking throughout ancient world. Modern digital humanities approaches have opened new possibilities for understanding composition, transmission, historical significance through computational methods identifying patterns invisible to traditional analysis. Database approaches enable comprehensive comparison with contemporary archives, royal inscriptions, literary compositions, revealing complex intertextual relationships. But perhaps the most important lesson from Sumerian King List involves understanding how textual traditions preserve and transmit cultural knowledge across millennia. The document's combination of historical memory and ideological sophistication continues offering crucial perspectives on relationships between political authority and cultural continuity. The mathematical precision of antediluvian reigns, 8,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years, wasn't ignorance or superstition. It was sophisticated theology embedding cosmic patterns into political history. The SAR 3600 connected earthly events to celestial cycles, suggesting that political change followed predictable astronomical patterns. The flood as boundary marker between mythological and historical time demonstrates how societies use narrative structures to organize temporal experience. Everything divides into before and after, creating frameworks enabling comprehension of fundamental change. The gradual reduction in reign lengths throughout early dynastic period creates bridge between cosmic and human temporal frameworks. Readers could trace evolution from divine to mortal governance, watching kingship transform from cosmic principle to political practice. The editorial decision to present simultaneous dynasties sequentially, maintaining fiction of undivided sovereignty, despite practical reality of competing powers, demonstrates how ideological consistency sometimes trumps factual accuracy in historical writing, serving legitimizing functions. The incorporation of Akkadian Empire, Semitic dynasty, into traditionally Sumerian framework shows how established textual traditions could absorb revolutionary changes while maintaining essential ideological functions. The who was king, who was not king formula acknowledging complete political breakdown demonstrates sophisticated editorial courage. Rather than omitting chaos, compilers documented crisis explicitly, creating literary monument to political failure serving as cautionary tale about consequences of departing from proper governmental traditions. The Gutian period's presentation as illegitimate interregnum, despite archaeological evidence of cultural synthesis, reveals how historical writing serves ideological purposes beyond simple factual record-keeping. The negative portrayal served later political needs by demonstrating consequences of foreign rule and benefits of maintaining proper cultural practices. The Third Renaissance portrayed as restoration after chaos established patterns subsequent dynasties would adapt. Rulers regularly claimed to have restored order after periods disrupting traditional values, echoing Gutian experience as symbolic template. The King List's influence on Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, biblical historical writing established methodological precedents, continuing to influence chronicle composition throughout ancient Near East. Organizational principles, editorial strategies, ideological frameworks provided templates later historians adapted while maintaining connections to authoritative traditions. Berossus's Greek transmission demonstrates how ancient frameworks could be modified to serve new cultural contexts while maintaining essential ideological functions. His 10 antediluvian kings ruling 432,000 years shows both continuity and adaptation, translation across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Biblical parallels, 10 generations Adam to Noah, extraordinarily long lifespans gradually decreasing, demonstrate shared cultural concepts transmitted through diplomatic contacts, cultural exchange, literary borrowing. These aren't coincidences, but evidence of interconnected ancient world-sharing intellectual frameworks. The archaeological correlations, Enmebaragesi's contemporary inscription, Mesanapata's gold bowl, Royal Cemetery of Akkadian administrative archives demonstrate that beneath theological elaboration lies genuine historical memory. The King List preserves real information while embedding it within cosmic frameworks. The document's genius lies in its dual function, preserving historical memory while serving contemporary political needs, creating coherent narratives from fragmentary traditions, connecting human events to divine patterns, legitimizing present authority through ancient precedents. Modern scholarship continues debating specific interpretations, which reigns are historical versus legendary, how to convert mythological chronology into plausible time-far aims, what editorial principles guided compilation. But certain conclusions seem secure. The antediluvian section represents sophisticated theological framework rather than historical memory. Mathematical precision demonstrates intellectual sophistication, not primitive ignorance. The cosmic numbers embed astronomical knowledge into political narrative. The flood serves as literary boundary marker separating mythological from proto-historical time, enabling ancient audiences to trace evolution from divine to human governance frameworks. Archaeological evidence of periodic flooding provides natural foundation for mythological narratives transformed into cosmic events. Early dynastic period shows genuine historical content increasingly mixed with legendary elaboration. Enmebaragesi marks definitive transition to verifiable history, contemporary inscriptions confirming existence while King List traditions elaborate achievements. Akkadian Empire represents first clearly historical period with extensive contemporary documentation, archaeological evidence, administrative archives confirming events while revealing discrepancies with King List chronology, suggesting ongoing editorial adaptation. The document evolved over centuries, copied, adapted, modified to serve changing political needs. Weld Blundell Prism represents crystallization of traditions around 2000 BC, but source materials extended back centuries earlier through oral and written transmission. Different versions, Nippur, Isin, others, show variations reflecting local political needs, emphasizing or de-emphasizing particular dynasties according to contemporary considerations. These variations demonstrate living tradition rather than fixed text. The scribal schools, Idubas, maintaining transmission, developed sophisticated methods for preserving while adapting. Standardized formatting, consistent terminology, careful orthographic details balanced against editorial flexibility, accommodating new material. The King List's preservation across multiple manuscript traditions demonstrates fundamental importance to Mesopotamian concepts of history and kingship. Despite variations in details, all versions maintain basic framework, suggesting essential elements considered fundamental to document's purpose. The influence extended through Assyrian adaptations, Babylonian chronicles, Berossus's Greek transmission, biblical parallels, Persian imperial ideology, creating intellectual legacy spanning 3 millennia and influencing Western historical consciousness. The document demonstrates how textual traditions can preserve cultural memory across vast temporal distances while adapting to serve contemporary needs. This dual function, preservation and adaptation, enabled long-term cultural continuity despite political transformations. The mathematical sophistication embedding cosmic patterns into political chronology reveals intellectual capabilities often underestimated in ancient societies. The SAR 3600, multiples creating cosmic cycles, astronomical knowledge applied to historical frameworks, all demonstrate sophisticated abstract thinking. The theological concepts about divine human boundaries, gradual separation from primordial proximity to divinity, moral implications of political change. These reveal complex religious thought, grappling with fundamental questions about authority, legitimacy, divine intervention in human affairs. The editorial strategies managing contradictory materials, creating coherent narratives from fragmentary sources, balancing ideological consistency against historical accuracy, these show sophisticated historical methodology operating according to different principles than modern historiography, but no less intellectually rigorous. The political functions legitimizing contemporary authority through ancient precedents, providing templates for understanding change, creating continuity despite transformation. These demonstrate how historical writing serves social needs beyond simple factual record-keeping. The cultural synthesis incorporating Akkadian dynasty into Sumerian framework, absorbing foreign elements while maintaining traditional structures, translating across linguistic boundaries while preserving essential content. These reveal sophisticated approaches to managing cultural diversity and change. The archaeological correlations, validating some claims while contradicting others, demonstrate complex relationships between textual traditions and material evidence, neither simply true nor false, but operating according to different principles, requiring sophisticated interpretive strategies. The comparative analysis with biblical Egyptian, Hittite, Persian traditions reveals shared Near Eastern intellectual frameworks transmitted through diplomatic contacts, cultural exchange, literary borrowing, demonstrating interconnected ancient world-sharing conceptual tools. The modern scholarly debates continuing to generate new interpretations demonstrate the document's enduring significance and complexity, resisting simple explanations while rewarding sophisticated analysis from multiple methodological perspectives. The digital humanities approaches enabling new patterns of analysis demonstrate how technological innovation opens fresh perspectives on ancient materials, computational methods revealing relationships invisible to traditional philology. But beyond scholarly debates lies the document's human significance. This represents one of humanity's earliest systematic attempts to understand its own history, to create frameworks making sense of political change across generations. The compilers faced genuine intellectual challenges. How do you organize fragmentary traditions into coherent narratives? How do you connect divine authority to political reality? How do you maintain cultural continuity while acknowledging change? How do you preserve memory while serving contemporary needs? Their solutions: mathematical precision creating cosmic frameworks, literary boundary markers separating mythological from historical time, editorial strategies maintaining ideological consistency, sophisticated adaptation serving multiple functions. These demonstrate intellectual sophistication deserving respect. The scribes who copied these texts across centuries, comparing versions, correcting errors, maintaining standards while accommodating changes, these anonymous professionals preserved cultural knowledge enabling modern understanding. The societies that valued this tradition enough to maintain it through political upheavals, foreign conquests, linguistic changes, cultural transformations, these demonstrate commitment to historical consciousness as fundamental cultural value. The King List teaches us that history isn't simply what happened, but rather frameworks societies create for understanding change, maintaining identity, transmitting knowledge across generations. It demonstrates that sophisticated historical thinking predates classical Greece by millennia, that complex intellectual traditions flourished in ancient Near East, creating conceptual tools Western civilization would later adopt and adapt. It reveals that questions we still grapple with: how to understand political legitimacy, how to balance continuity with change, how to transmit cultural knowledge, how to create meaning from historical experience. These aren't modern innovations, but ancient preoccupations. It shows that textual traditions can preserve and transmit knowledge across vast temporal distances while remaining flexible enough to serve changing needs, that preservation and adaptation aren't contradictory, but complementary functions. The antediluvian kings ruling impossible spans remind us that different cultures organize temporal experience according to different principles, that 28,800 years conveys theological truth about divine proximity rather than chronological fact about elapsed time. The flood as cosmic boundary teaches us that societies use narrative structures to organize comprehension of fundamental change, that before and after create frameworks enabling understanding of transformation. The gradual reduction in reign lengths demonstrates how transitional frameworks bridge mythological and historical consciousness, enabling audiences to follow evolution from cosmic to human scales. The editorial fiction of sequential kingship, despite simultaneous dynasties, shows how ideological consistency sometimes matters more than factual accuracy when texts serve legitimizing functions, that maintaining coherent worldviews can require creative interpretation of evidence. The incorporation of Akkadian Empire into Sumerian framework reveals how textual traditions can absorb revolutionary changes while maintaining essential functions. That adaptation enables preservation. The "who was king" formula, acknowledging complete breakdown, demonstrates that historical writing can document failure without losing legitimizing capacity. That honest engagement with crisis can strengthen rather than weaken cultural authority. The Gutian period's presentation as illegitimate interregnum shows how societies construct negative examples serving didactic purposes, that historical narratives teach through cautionary tales as much as celebratory accounts. The Ur-III Renaissance, portrayed as restoration, establishes pattern of cyclical renewal. Decline followed by regeneration under proper leadership, restoring traditional values. This pattern would influence Mesopotamian political thought for millennia. The King List's influence on subsequent traditions, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, biblical, demonstrates how foundational texts shape intellectual frameworks across cultures and millennia. The document created template subsequent historians would adapt while maintaining essential organizational principles. Berossus's Greek transmission shows how ancient knowledge could be translated across linguistic and cultural boundaries, that intellectual achievements could transcend their original contexts while maintaining recognizable forms. Biblical parallels demonstrate shared Near Eastern intellectual frameworks transmitted through complex networks of cultural exchange. That ancient world possessed sophisticated mechanisms for sharing knowledge across political and ethnic boundaries. Archaeological correlations validate some claims while contradicting others, reminding us that textual traditions and material evidence exist in complex relationships requiring nuanced interpretation rather than simple validation or falsification. The document's dual function, preserving historical memory while serving contemporary political needs, demonstrates that these aren't contradictory purposes but complementary aspects of how societies maintain cultural continuity. The mathematical sophistication, embedding astronomical knowledge into political chronology, reveals intellectual capabilities ancient societies possessed: abstract thinking, pattern recognition, systematic organization of complex information. The theological concepts about divine human relationships, moral implications of political change, cosmic patterns underlying earthly events, these show sophisticated religious thought grappling with fundamental questions still relevant today. The editorial strategies creating coherent narratives from fragmentary materials demonstrate historical methodology operating according to different principles than modern scholarship, but no less intellectually rigorous within its own frameworks. The scribal traditions maintaining transmission across centuries show professional dedication to preserving cultural knowledge, anonymous scholars whose labor enabled our modern understanding. The societies valuing this tradition enough to copy, preserve, adapt it through repeated political upheavals demonstrate commitment to historical consciousness as fundamental cultural value. The King List ultimately stands as testament to human intellect applied to understanding temporal experience, creating frameworks, making sense of change, preserving memory, transmitting knowledge, maintaining identity across generations. It demonstrates that historical consciousness, systematic attempts to comprehend relationships between past and present, represents ancient rather than modern innovation, that sophisticated historical thinking flourished in Mesopotamia millennia before classical Greece. It reveals that fundamental questions about political legitimacy, cultural continuity, knowledge transmission, meaning-making from historical experience, these preoccupy humanity across cultures and millennia. The document's composition represents extraordinary intellectual achievement, synthesizing fragmentary traditions into coherent framework, embedding cosmic patterns into political chronology, creating literary structures enabling comprehension of vast temporal spans, balancing preservation with adaptation. The transmission across centuries demonstrates cultural commitment to maintaining historical consciousness, scribes copying, comparing, correcting, adapting while preserving essential frameworks, societies valuing knowledge enough to support professional scholars maintaining traditions. The influence on subsequent historical writing established methodological precedents shaping how humans recorded and understood their own histories. Organizational principles, editorial strategies, ideological frameworks adapted across cultures and millennia. Modern scholarly approaches continue revealing new dimensions. Digital humanities enabling pattern recognition, comparative analysis illuminating shared frameworks, archaeological correlations validating some claims while complicating others. Sophisticated interpretation recognizing complex relationships between text and material evidence. But perhaps most importantly, the King List reminds us that our own historical frameworks aren't natural or inevitable, but rather culturally constructed tools for organizing temporal experience. That how we understand history reflects choices about what matters, what we preserve, how we create meaning. The antediluvian kings ruling 240 years teach us that impossible numbers can convey profound truths when properly understood. That mathematical precision doesn't necessarily indicate chronological accuracy, but rather theological sophistication. The flood sweeping over demonstrates how single events can serve as boundary markers organizing entire civilizations' temporal consciousness, that before and after create frameworks enabling comprehension of fundamental transformation. The gradual rain reduction throughout early dynastic period shows how transitional structures bridge different modes of consciousness, enabling audiences to follow evolution from mythological to historical frameworks without jarring discontinuities. The editorial fiction maintaining sequential kingship despite simultaneous dynasties reveals how ideological coherence can require creative interpretation, that maintaining workable worldviews sometimes matters more than strict factual accuracy. The Akkadian incorporation demonstrates how revolutionary changes can be absorbed into traditional frameworks through sophisticated adaptation, that preservation often requires flexibility rather than rigid adherence to original forms. The chaos formula, who was king, who was not king, shows how historical writing can acknowledge complete system failure while maintaining legitimizing capacity. That honest engagement with crisis strengthens rather than weakens cultural authority. The Gutian period as negative example demonstrates how societies construct cautionary tales serving didactic purposes, that historical narratives teach through warnings as much as celebrations. The Ur III Renaissance as restoration establishes cyclical pattern, decline, followed by renewal under proper leadership. This pattern would resonate through Mesopotamian history, each new dynasty claiming to restore order after chaos echoing primordial templates. The influence on Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, biblical traditions shows how foundational texts shape intellectual frameworks across vast temporal and cultural distances, that certain organizational principles prove remarkably durable and adaptable. The archaeological correlations remind us that textual traditions and material evidence exist in complex relationships, neither simply validating nor falsifying each other, but requiring sophisticated interpretation, recognizing different types of truth and different modes of preservation. The scribal dedication maintaining transmission demonstrates professional commitment to cultural preservation. Anonymous scholars whose patient labor across centuries enabled modern understanding. The mathematical embedding of astronomical knowledge reveals intellectual sophistication ancient societies possessed, abstract thinking, pattern recognition, systematic organization applied to understanding temporal experience. The theological concepts about divine human relationships show sophisticated religious thought, addressing fundamental questions about authority, legitimacy, moral order, underlying political change. The editorial strategies demonstrate historical methodology operating according to coherent principles, not primitive or naive, but sophisticated within its own frameworks, serving purposes different from modern historiography. The King List ultimately represents one of humanity's most remarkable intellectual achievements. Systematic attempt to comprehend political development across vast temporal spans, preserve cultural memory, transmit knowledge, create meaning from historical experience. It demonstrates that sophisticated historical consciousness predates classical antiquity by millennia, that ancient Near East developed complex intellectual traditions creating conceptual tools Western civilization would later inherit. Modern engagement with the King List requires recognizing both its historical value and its ideological functions, appreciating genuine information preserved while understanding how that information served contemporary political and religious purposes. The document rewards sophisticated analysis from multiple perspectives: philological examination revealing compositional techniques, archaeological correlation illuminating historical contexts, comparative study showing shared frameworks, theological interpretation understanding religious dimensions. Digital humanities approaches enable new patterns of recognition, computational analysis revealing relationships invisible to traditional methods, database comparisons illuminating intertextual connections, statistical analysis identifying systematic patterns. But technical sophistication shouldn't obscure human dimensions. Real people creating these texts, real societies valuing them enough to preserve them, real intellectual struggles making sense of temporal experience and political change. The compilers faced genuine challenges, organizing fragmentary traditions into coherent narratives, connecting divine authority to political reality, maintaining cultural continuity while acknowledging change, preserving memory while serving contemporary needs. Their solutions: mathematical frameworks, literary boundary markers, sophisticated editorial strategies, flexible adaptation. These demonstrate intellectual achievements deserving respect across 4 millennia. The scribes copying these texts across centuries, comparing versions, correcting errors, maintaining standards while accommodating changes, these anonymous professionals preserved cultural knowledge enabling our modern understanding. The societies maintaining these traditions through political upheavals, foreign conquests, linguistic changes, cultural transformations. These demonstrate commitment to historical consciousness as fundamental cultural value. The King List teaches that history isn't simply what happened, but rather frameworks societies create for understanding change, maintaining identity, transmitting knowledge across generations, that historical consciousness represents fundamental human intellectual achievement. It shows that questions we still grapple with: understanding political legitimacy, balancing continuity with change, transmitting cultural knowledge, creating meaning from experience. These aren't modern innovations, but ancient preoccupations. It demonstrates that sophisticated intellectual traditions flourished in ancient Near East, creating conceptual tools Western civilization would later adopt, that our own historical frameworks rest on foundations laid millennia ago. The antediluvian section, with its impossible reign lengths, reminds us that different cultures organize temporal experience according to different principles, that numbers can convey theological truth rather than chronological fact. The flood as cosmic boundary teaches that societies use narrative structures organizing comprehension of fundamental change, that before and after create frameworks enabling understanding. The gradual rain reduction demonstrates transitional frameworks bridging mythological and historical consciousness, enabling audiences to follow evolution without jarring discontinuities. The sequential presentation of simultaneous dynasties shows how ideological coherence can require creative interpretation, that maintaining workable worldviews sometimes matters more than strict accuracy. The Akkadian incorporation reveals how revolutionary changes can be absorbed through sophisticated adaptation, that preservation often requires flexibility. The chaos formula acknowledging breakdown shows how historical writing can document failure while maintaining legitimizing capacity, that honest crisis engagement can strengthen cultural authority. The Gutian period, as negative example, demonstrates how societies construct cautionary tales, that historical narratives teach through warnings as much as celebrations. The Ur-III Renaissance establishes cyclical pattern, decline followed by renewal, that would resonate through Mesopotamian history. The influence on subsequent traditions shows how foundational texts shape intellectual frameworks across vast distances, that certain principles prove remarkably durable. The document's continuing scholarly relevance demonstrates enduring complexity, resisting simple explanations while rewarding sophisticated analysis. The human significance transcends academic debates. This represents humanity's earliest systematic historical consciousness, frameworks making sense of change, preserving memory, transmitting knowledge, maintaining identity. It shows that sophisticated historical thinking flourished millennia before classical Greece, that ancient Near East developed complex intellectual traditions, creating conceptual tools we still use. It reveals that fundamental questions about legitimacy, continuity, knowledge transmission, meaning-making, these preoccupy humanity across cultures and millennia. The Sumerian King List stands as testament to human intellect applied to understanding temporal experience, creating frameworks that have shaped how civilizations comprehend their own histories for over 4,000 years. From Alulim, ruling 800 years when kingship descended from heaven, to Ibisin's 24-year reign ending Ur-III's glory, the Sumerian King List traces humanity's journey from mythological to historical consciousness, from cosmic time to chronological time, from divine kings to mortal rulers. The document's genius lies in its dual achievement, preserving genuine historical memory while embedding it within theological frameworks serving contemporary political needs. It creates coherent narratives from fragmentary traditions. It connects human events to divine patterns. It legitimizes present authority through ancient precedents. The mathematical precision, multiples of 3600 creating cosmic cycles, demonstrates intellectual sophistication, not primitive ignorance. The flood as boundary marker shows narrative structures organizing temporal comprehension. The gradual rain reduction bridges mythological and historical consciousness without jarring discontinuity. Archaeological correlations confirm some claims: Enmebarajesi's contemporary inscription, Mesanapata's gold bowl, royal cemeteries' spectacular burials, Akkadian administrative archives, while complicating others, reminding us that textual traditions and material evidence exist in complex relationships requiring nuanced interpretation. The influence on Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, biblical traditions demonstrates how foundational texts shape intellectual frameworks across cultures and millennia. Berossus's Greek transmission, Genesis genealogies, Darius's Behistun inscription, all adapted King List organizational principles while serving different cultural contexts. Modern scholarship continues debating specifics while recognizing certain conclusions. Antediluvian section represents theological framework. Flood serves as literary boundary. Early dynastic shows genuine historical content increasingly mixed with legend. Akkadian period is clearly historical. The document evolved over centuries through copying and adaptation. The scribes maintaining this tradition across millennia, the societies valuing it enough to preserve through upheavals, the intellectual labor creating frameworks for understanding temporal experience. These demonstrate commitment to historical consciousness as fundamental cultural value. The Sumerian King List ultimately teaches us that history isn't simply what happened, but rather frameworks societies create for understanding change, maintaining identity, transmitting knowledge. It represents one of humanity's earliest systematic attempts to comprehend political development across vast temporal spans, an intellectual achievement that continues shaping how we understand our own histories 4,000 years later. Subscribe to explore more ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, from the Akkadians who built the First Empire to the Babylonians who created Hammurabi's law code, from the Assyrians who dominated the Near East to the Persians who inherited their legacy, discovering how these interconnected cultures developed writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, and historical consciousness that laid foundations for Western civilization and continue influencing how we organize knowledge, understand time, and comprehend our place in the long arc of human history.